What if you could reverse the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome to have a healthy baby? Would you like to know how? I imagine that if you're watching this live broadcast today, Ask Gabriela Rosa Live, you probably want to know the answers. And so here we are, welcome. I'm Gabriela Rosa, I'm a fertility specialist. I'm a Harvard University awarded scholar, and for the last 2 decades, I have helped thousands of couples overcome infertility and miscarriage, even when other treatments have failed. And our program, our in-house program, has a 78.15% success rate in taking home healthy babies. So, you know, it's definitely something that we are very passionate about over here. For the last, little while, we have now since educated 120,000 people in more than 100 countries, and having treated women with PCOS in the thousands, and personally also having PCOS, I know that there are definitely things that I can bring and add to this equation and this conversation that is going to help you today. So that is exactly what I would like to do. So welcome, welcome. We are live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram. From next week, we're probably going to be live in another few platforms, but I'll announce that as we kind of get things, moving forward. So hopefully that's going to help us to increase the reach and get this information to a whole lot more people. So let's get started. And, the very first thing, understanding specifically what it's like to have unmanaged symptoms of PCOS. Personally and professionally, I can say that it is really such a challenge, when you feel like you're doing all of the right things and you are putting in place the recommendations that are given to you, but still you're not really quite getting there in terms of the results that you want to see. You might still be struggling with your weight, you might be still struggling with acne, you might be still struggling, with insulin resistance and all of the symptoms that are associated with PCOS. And it can be such a challenge to figure out if the things that you're doing actually are making a difference, and if you've got the right strategy and it's just a matter of continuing to apply a winning strategy, or whether what you're doing is not the right strategy after all. So I get what that feels like, and I'm sure that all of you listening to this, if you are struggling with PCOS, also know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So give me some loves, give me some likes, let me know that we're kind of on the same page about that. And for that reason, I want to acknowledge you, because it would be so easy to just kind of turn a blind eye and just hope for the best and think that, it's all going to resolve itself, and not look for further knowledge and information and insights that are going to help you. But that's not you, because you're here. And so welcome, and I really want to acknowledge you. As always, Ask Gabriela Rosa is all about making sure that we've got your main questions covered, right? And today, I'm going to spend the next 50 minutes or so really looking at the things that you can do. We're going to explore a little bit about PCOS and the condition and, causes and all of those things. But really where I want to focus today is I want to focus on effective solutions, which essentially is what what I've described this talk to be today. And specifically the things that I have seen personally and professionally that work for people in the best possible way. PCOS is one of those really challenging conditions, and there are lots of questions. In fact, sometimes in terms of the why and the how, there are more questions than there are answers. That is certainly the truth in terms of this particular condition. But there are definitely things that we can do to improve and optimize things. I just realized that I'm not wearing my microphone for Instagram, so let's put that on, and hopefully you guys will be able to have better sound on Instagram. Yeah, there we go. So some of the main questions that I get asked and have gotten asked is, the number one question, I actually posted about this in the Fertility Challenge closed group that we have for that program. And by the way, the next one's coming up on January 8th. And incidentally, a lot of the things that I talk about in the Fertility Challenge are actually perfect for normalizing the symptoms and addressing PCOS. So just be aware of that. And I'll talk more about that later on, and I'll give you some very specific advice. But, the biggest question that I get asked about PCOS, and there's a whole lot that I'll read to you in a moment, the biggest question is, how can I manage the symptoms of PCOS and increase my chances of having a healthy baby. It's pretty obvious that that would be the case, especially because out of every reproductive condition out there that may cause anovulation, PCOS is responsible for about 80% of anovulatory cases, which is lack of ovulation or irregular cycles, which makes really difficult to, for timing conception and trying to conceive when you're trying to have a baby. And I'll tell a little bit more about my story. Actually, in the Fertility Challenge, I tell my whole story. So if you want the in-depth review, go there and you'll get it. Here, I'll tell you a little bit of the tidbits that are important so that you can understand what it is that you can do with that information and how you can optimize your chances. But really, it's about ensuring that you get clarity about what's actually going to make a difference. Because there's a whole lot of things that you could be doing, but there's only really like 2 or 3 that, in terms of regulating cycles and managing the majority of the symptoms of PCOS, that actually make a difference. Whenever I tell people, and I think that with our new camera, you can probably see this. Whenever I tell people that, I have PCOS, they're like, oh my God, but your skin is so good. And, all of these things. And it's like, yeah, I've got a couple of pimples from time to time. But, ultimately, it's because I manage the metabolic aspect of the condition, right, on a personal level. So some of the questions that I get asked, how does PCOS affect fertility and miscarriage? Why losing weight doesn't always reverse PCOS symptoms, and what can be done about that? Can I reverse or cure PCOS? The answer is no, okay? But you can actually manage the symptoms to a point where then the condition is almost dormant, right? So that definitely is something that we're going to talk about. What causes PCOS? What happens if you don't treat PCOS? And that is a big problem. Can PCOS affect my prospective child? Can you have a healthy body weight and still experience PCOS? Are there any particular foods that I should be eating or should be avoiding in order to manage this condition? And how do you know, or how do I know that I'm ovulating every month? And how do I time conception if my cycles are so irregular? Should I be taking medication to manage the symptoms of PCOS? And is there anything my male partner can do to mitigate the effects of PCOS and us both becoming parents? So I think that pretty much, I'm sure you would agree. And if you don't, please pop it into the comments, your specific questions, if there's anything else about this that you want to know. But I think that pretty much covers, the majority of the types of questions that I get about this particular condition. Today, as always, I'm going to share, my biggest thing about helping people understand what it is that they can do to optimize their chances is focusing on the 20% of the effort that's going to give us 80% of our result. So today I'm going to share 3 big ideas, as I always do. I have a bonus one today though, because I couldn't keep it to 3. So I thought I'd throw in a bonus instead of leaving it out, right? So you should be thankful for that one. But yes, I'll be throwing in a bonus idea because it's a very, very important one. And it talks to, this whole aspect of how do you time conception. And those 3 things that I'm going to be talking about are going to really consolidate the foundation of everything that you do in terms of PCOS. There is definitely more. Mind you, there is a universe more, things that you could be doing. And we'll talk about mitigating or managing some of the symptoms that, you need to actually, for example, how to treat your skin or how to treat excess body hair. All of those things are definitely a little bit different because, especially with excess body hair, you can't reverse the amount of hair that you have. The only thing that you can do there is obviously treat it. Laser therapy is definitely effective if you're not blonde, right? And of course, waxing, all of those are ways of treating excess body hair. But unfortunately, you do have to treat it before it will stop growing back to the same degree. Right? But we'll talk more about all of these things. The first thing that I want to do is I want to just put a couple of pieces together for you first in terms of what is this condition, how is it diagnosed, because this is one of the biggest places that I see where people struggle not only to understand what's going on with their body when they're having irregular cycles. You know, when I was diagnosed with PCOS, literally I was 18 years old and I had come off the pill, which I had been on for only 6 months, right? And I thought, no, this is just not good for me. I don't want to be on it. And when I came off the pill, my periods didn't return. And I was concerned. And at the time, I was working with a group of obstetrician and gynecologists, and I was like, okay, asking questions, trying to figure out why could this be the case. And then I was recommended to have some tests, and I ended up seeing another doctor outside of that clinic to get some blood tests. And, you know, by doing that, I ended up having the diagnosis of PCOS, but no recommendation whatsoever about what to do, how to manage it. You know, was it even something that I needed to worry about? And that, this obviously being a very long time ago, it was a little bit concerning for me in terms of, because really the doctor, as he's giving me the diagnosis, he's literally on the phone, he says, call me for the results. On the phone, you have polycystic ovarian disease, and that's why you don't have a period. And I'm like, okay, what does it mean? Am I going to die? You know, like, what does it even mean? And you can imagine more than 20 years ago, it's definitely not the type of thing that, it wasn't common. It wasn't a common discussion as it is today. And so basically, you know, it took me a little bit of time to understand what this was all about. But, you know, piecing all of those pieces of the puzzle together makes all of the difference when you're actually wanting to change the result. So understanding what are the factors, because there are many different, because PCOS is a hormonal, and it's reproductive hormones as well as metabolic hormones, right? It's complex because it's multi-systematic, it's multi-system, right? And so it's not just one area that gets affected, it's multiple hormones get affected, and multiple systems and physiology also get affected. And so understanding where each one of those things are coming out of balance, you know, as I always talk about the fact that fertility is a chain reaction of events, right? What we see on this end here is the outcome. It's a diagnosis, or it's the baby or the lack of a baby. But really what causes whatever it is that we're seeing here is a cascade of previous events. And typically that cascade of previous events is not looked at effectively or efficiently enough to be able to help to understand what are all of the pieces that we need to treat along that path, not just the end result, right? And that's how a lot of couples, you know, this is a diagram I love to share because a lot of times people go around in circles for too long, you know, and sometimes people run out of time as a result of doing that. Sure, the journey is never straightforward. It's never a direct line. I would love for it to be a direct line. And if I can figure that one out, that's definitely going to be the day to celebrate. But, you know, I can't. And so really, we know that whatever it is that we do, that we implement in a systematic and methodical way, does get us out of this, you know, kind of going around in circles. And it is still a process. It is certainly, and especially in terms of what I'm going to be sharing with you today, it's certainly a matter of having the right strategy and continuing to apply it day in, day out, and being consistent. And I can honestly vouch for that, again, personally and professionally, because I've seen it so many times. You know, so in terms of, it's a difficult condition to diagnose. And one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that you are really clear about this, I've created a handout. In fact, you guys can access the handout if you just put it on a browser, thefertile.me/PCOS handout. So thefertile.me/PCOS handout. And there's a few things that in there that are going to be very helpful. But one of the main things that you will find in that handout that is going to be extremely helpful is the testing protocol that we use not only to diagnose, but to continue to assess a PCOS case, okay? And this is something that I have never ever shared before outside of my clinic. It's definitely vital information that you need in order to be able to understand exactly what's happening for you. So, but this is only just the first step, right? Because then you actually need to be able to manage properly the findings of those results. What I'm going to share with you today definitely and decidedly from a self-care component, from a self-care aspect, and the things that you can do to put in place that foundation of treatment. And now for me, it's literally the only thing I use to manage and maintain symptoms, and to just have just general good health, right, is exactly what I'm going to be sharing with you today. And they are the pieces. I know that I did many different things to regulate my cycles when I was trying to conceive, and these were the absolute pieces that I know made the biggest difference, because I was taking all the supplements and I was taking all the herbs, and that was still taking forever. And it wasn't until I implemented what I'm going to be sharing with you today that it actually completely changed, right? So that handout, definitely, if you've missed it, it's thefertile.me/PCOS handout. And, this is a very important part of the equation, but you also need to realize that sometimes, even though I've got for you there the reference ranges and the ideal ranges, sometimes you might have symptoms and still have your blood results within a normal range, okay? And that's where an experienced clinician can really assist in your case to figure out what's going on, because you still need to treat the symptoms. If you're having the symptoms of PCOS, and really irregular or absent cycles, acne, excess body and facial hair, balding of the scalp, excess hormones, androgens, male hormones, and in the handout you'll see there's quite a lot of different hormones that we test from an androgen perspective, and then of course on ultrasound the rosary bead, kind of follicles around the ovary. Now, mind you, the criteria for diagnosis says that you need to have 2 out of the 3 in order to be able to diagnose PCOS. But here's the thing. Sometimes, and the ultrasound, even if the ovaries are clear, it does not mean that you don't have PCOS if you have any of those symptoms or conditions that I've talked about, okay? So, and sometimes, there are many different, because there is a metabolic component to this, obesity becomes an issue. So visceral fat, fat around the middle is going to be a problem. Also, there is an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and diabetes. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration as a part of the whole diagnosis, okay? So just because you might not have cysts around the ovaries, as they're called, they're actually follicles around the ovaries in the rosemary bead type fashion, just because you don't have that, and you've got, and your cycles are semi-regular, right, it doesn't mean that you don't have some of the other issues. I mean, the fact that, if it's anything above 28.5 days, it's considered irregular. So that we need to take into consideration, right? But basically, now I can't see you guys on Facebook today for some reason. Are you guys there? I can see that there's a few people on the live, but I'm not seeing any comments. Just give me some likes, give me some loves, just to make sure that it's working, because if questions come through, I can't see it. I know that I've got a question here on yeah, so somebody's asking about fertility breakthrough video. I think that you're probably talking about the fertility breakthrough book, which is this one, but I'm not sure exactly. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about, this is Jane on Instagram. If you're talking about the fact that you need extra help with conception but you don't have PCOS, that's great. You can listen to any of the Ask Gabriela Rosa lives and put in your questions in any of those as well, if you have them. But basically today we are definitely talking, fantastic. Somebody said hello. I can see questions are coming through and that you're here. It's a little bit delayed, but this is good news. So great. Thank you so much. Sometimes it's difficult to know, if you guys are there or not. I can see it on Instagram much faster for some reason. But anyway, so as I was saying, in terms of getting to the clarity, getting to the bottom of understanding what it is that we need to know, the testing is going to be a part of the picture for sure. But symptomology is also very important. So we can't disregard that. And remember, the criteria, the diagnostic criteria, looks at having at least 2 of those 3 things that we've talked about. So, those things are definitely going to, and mind you, sometimes people will have PCOS or they've got some symptoms, but not others. And it's not that they don't have the actual condition. It's just that symptoms develop in different order, right? Or in a different way. And so being aware of those things and also kind of look, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to keep a diary of your symptoms throughout the month, particularly when you have PCOS. And I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, and I'll talk more about that later on. But it's such an important part of this piece of being able to diagnose, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't even remember what I had for breakfast 2 days ago, dinner I should say, but because I don't have breakfast, but basically I don't know what I had for dinner 2 days ago, so I'm not going to remember what happened in my cycle 3 months ago or 4 months ago or a year ago, right? It's important to have it written down somewhere where you consistently do it. I use an app on my phone. It's just, a basic little app. And I don't actually chart my temperatures anymore, but I will absolutely recommend that you do that. But I keep track of, the first day of my cycle, the last day of my cycle, and any kind of different symptoms that I've experienced in that cycle, right? And I have that. I was actually looking at that today for this particular talk, because I was looking, okay, well, let's see how regular my cycles have become. I used to go, sometimes I actually went through a period of 2 years that I didn't have a cycle at all. Right. And my body was in a mess. I didn't feel great, acne, weight gain, difficulty in processing carbohydrates in general. All of those things were definitely a problem. Now, when I continue to implement this strategy that I'm sharing with you, my cycles are regular every single month, which is, once you've actually had children, it's very annoying. So, and I get it. That's the complete opposite when you haven't, because I've been there too, where I was like, oh my God, all I want is the opportunity to be able to try to have a baby, and I'm not even having a cycle. So it was very, very difficult to really, feel happy at all about how my cycle was going and how it was operating. So I totally get what that feels like as well, but also listen to when I say that if you implement what I'm going to share with you today, it's definitely something that you can affect. You can change it. And Amuse Events is asking, that's how I feel now. How can I fix this? Watch on. And if for whatever reason I've run out of time on Instagram, because sometimes it happens, come back on Facebook, because the Facebook Live is going to stay up for you guys. So in terms of, what is PCOS, I've already said that, and, I won't go over it again. But the weight aspect is something that I often get asked. It's like, okay, well, I'm either overweight or I'm underweight or I'm normal weight and I still have PCOS, and losing weight hasn't actually resolved the issue, because people mostly say, and it's true for the majority of cases, that people who are overweight and have PCOS, when they lose weight, the symptoms are definitely improved. But what happens is that about 30% of women with PCOS, they will have metabolic syndrome without necessarily being overweight. So it is a problem, because, it's like, okay, well, what do I do in that case? You do exactly what I'm going to talk to you about, because even if you're not overweight, that's going to definitely help a lot. So the cause of PCOS is a little bit misunderstood, or not completely understood up until this point. We know that it's definitely genetic and environmental. And you see, when it comes to anything to do with genetics, there is going to be an environmental component, because there is a saying in genetics where, the genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. And that is exactly what happens in PCOS and every other genetically, modulated condition. And pretty much these days, there is not one condition that is not going to be genetically modulated in some way. That's why removing the obstacles to optimum health in very many cases invariably improve every symptom that a person is actually experiencing, and helps the body to go back to what it does best, which is to work towards homeostasis, right? Work towards balance. And so the conversation here is very similar to conversations that we've had in the past in terms of removing the obstacles, because anything that causes your body, let's think about it in these terms. If you were pregnant right this second, what are all of the things that you would absolutely start doing or stop doing if you found out that you're pregnant right now? Right? There's a series of things. You know, the second that a woman gets pregnant, the number one question in her mind is my baby going to be healthy? Right? And then we start to look at every possible thing that we can do to make sure that we can protect that pregnancy. And for those of you who may have been pregnant before or have experienced miscarriages, or, you know, kind of have a sense of what I'm saying, that is true every single time, right? And so what happens with that is that the same things that you would do in order to protect and optimize the health of that baby developing in utero is the same thing that you need to do to protect and optimize the health and the quality of your eggs and sperm developing within your body. Right? And when I talk about, you know, removing those obstacles, really what I'm talking about is the fact that we need to work first and foremost towards optimum health, because doing that is going to absolutely improve and optimize the way in which the body operates and that whole biochemical chain reaction that I talk about. Okay, so that's going to be really important. But the environmental piece is really about lifestyle choices, and it's about the things that trigger certain events. So for me, my biggest trigger in terms of PCOS was the oral contraceptive pill, right? And those triggers, when removed, and isn't it ironic that often, you know, when we're talking about treatment of PCOS, doctors will put you on the pill. And it's like, that doesn't do anything other than just suppress hormones and kind of create some kind of monotone. It's not a treatment for PCOS, particularly not if you're trying to conceive. I mean, you're absolutely not going to conceive. So then the next kind of standard therapy treatment that's given is metformin, right? And for many people, it works because it resolves, or it helps to balance that insulin modulation, insulin resistance that perhaps is a problem within the system in the metabolic sense in terms of PCOS. But there are many other better ways of addressing this as well. And that's really, you know, the important conversation of today. So there are, just before we jump straight into the things that you can do, I just want to, because one of the questions that I get asked is, how does PCOS get impacted, or how does, PCOS impact the risk of miscarriage? There is definitely a correlation between the risk of miscarriage and PCOS, as well as the risk of neurodevelopment issues and the baby, right? Particularly, there are studies that show that ADHD is increased in kids with PCOS. I certainly know that I have one child who is very active. my first child. So I wouldn't call him ADHD, but I certainly know that he's busy. He's very busy. He keeps me very busy. And so, you know, there is a correlation in the science in terms of all of this. But the risk of miscarriage, the increased risk of miscarriage with PCOS happens because of the metabolic imbalances that are present, okay? And those typically, we're looking at insulin modulation, so this dysfunction in insulin, you know, the way in which insulin is uptaken and used and utilized and how it actually relates to glucose within the system. Those metabolic imbalances will definitely make a huge difference. Also, homocysteine typically is increased in women with PCOS, and that causes a metabolic imbalance that can increase the risk of miscarriage because it impacts methylation, which I've talked about before in the Ask Gabriela Rosa Live about MTHFR. So if you want to know more about that link, definitely watch that particular session. And then, of course, there's the obesity side of things. And last week, we actually talked about weight and human reproduction. And I've talked about all of the things that you need to know, not only to lose weight. And in fact, these two talks are close together, because I would highly recommend, if you haven't yet, if you have PCOS and you are overweight, I would highly recommend you watch last week's episode, which is weight and human reproduction, because in there I talked about the trial that we did last year, talking about intermittent fasting and also, basically fasting in general, right? And time restricted feeding. So definitely have a watch of that particular talk, because I don't want to talk about that again today or this week, because there's other things that I want to cover with you guys. But what I've spoken about in there is absolutely going to make a huge difference to PCOS. I know that for me personally, it has been something that has completely been a game changer in terms of getting my cycles to be regulated, and certainly my body and energy and everything else, right? Skin and so on. So I would highly recommend that you go back there, and also understand that the time to optimize your chances of creating a healthy pregnancy is not when you are already pregnant, right? It takes about 8 months for the egg to mature. The 4 months prior to a conception attempt is an incredibly important time to balance and almost reboot the system, but rebalance metabolic processes if they are not already in balance, right? So it's very important to do that. And that's fine. I mean, even if you don't have PCOS. So there's a question here talking about fibroids and yeah. So that conversation, Rhonda, is for another day, my darling. But because today we're talking solely about PCOS, but it's certainly, you know, for women who have irregular cycles, the same things apply that I'm going to be talking about, even if the irregular cycle is shorter rather than longer than usual, right? So this is definitely still a conversation that's going to be of great importance. But again, in terms of the weight aspect, that is part of the reason as to why there is an increased risk of miscarriage. So if you want to resolve that piece and give yourself the best possible chance, last week's webinar is definitely, or Facebook Live actually, is the one that I would recommend that you watch. Then of course there is a link between ovarian hyperstimulation through IVF and PCOS, and we all know that, you know, it can be a fatal condition, and it's something that also, you know, increases the risk of complications. I mean, obstetric and of course reproductive complications, because there are many different aspects that will then get out of balance, so to speak, when those issues are at play. Okay, so then obviously pregnancy-induced hypertension also increases the risk of miscarriage, and of course the risk to the fetus and the developing embryo. Preterm births are also more likely to happen when there is a chance of, or when there is PCOS, and large for the gestational age babies. Now, those babies are typically linked, or there is a higher incidence of things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and lots of other health conditions for babies who are larger for larger for gestational age. That's one of the biggest issues with for women with diabetes, right, and gestational diabetes. So those are all factors that will play a role, and for women with PCOS, they are exacerbated, and that's why the link to miscarriage and of course negative reproductive outcomes are more likely. The key thing here, and the important part to take away from this conversation, is that these are things you can do something about, right? And as I've just said before, you want to be doing something about them prior to getting pregnant. Okay, so this is the time. So let's go ahead and talk about my 3 big ideas. The very first one is getting your head right, right? Who would agree? And I'd love to hear, you know, on the comments, certainly on Facebook, if you guys, you know, give me some love, give me some like if you agree with this. The hardest part about making a lifestyle change, about losing weight, about, you know, doing anything that is going to improve your health is that it's a changing habit, right? And the hardest part is actually getting your head right about it, right? For me, I know that that has always been my biggest challenge, right? Once I get my head right, then I can do anything. I don't know about you guys, but I think that, you know, it plays out. You know, having treated many thousands of people over the years, I know that this is something that plays out pretty much across the board. And this is why I wanted to start, I agree, you know, on Facebook Live. And this is why I wanted to start right here, right? Which is getting your head right. Because if we don't get your head right, you can know all the best and most fabulous things to do to improve and optimize your chances of taking home a healthy baby, and you won't do them. So how much is that going to help you? Not at all, right? So we want to make sure that we get that piece right. So how do we do that? Because, you know, there's therapy, we can spend years there. There's lots of different ways, but one of the ways that I have found that is so incredibly effective is good old humble pen and paper, right? And in that pen and paper, we do what I like to call a costs exercise, right? And a cost exercise, and I give this exercise actually as part of the Fertility Challenge because it is so powerful. And when you implement it, I know for me, every single time I'm stuck on doing something or not doing something that I need to change in some way, I actually sit down, as painful as it is, and I do a writing exercise. I do a cost exercise. So let me explain how a cost exercise works. It's super simple, and you will want to have some pen and paper right now so that you can write down the instructions. Or if you participate in January's Fertility Challenge, you will definitely be able to get access to all the things you need there. But basically, it's very simple. So there are 3 questions. In fact, there are 4 questions that you're going to write on paper. And typically, what I recommend is an A4 piece of paper, something about this size for each question, okay? And you might want to make it blank on both sides because, sometimes, like if it's something that's needs, a good amount of leverage, like if I need to create a good amount of leverage on myself to get something done, I will sit there and I will write and write and write and write and write. And I promise, by the time I finish that exercise, I'm like, that's it. No longer have to talk to me about why I should or could or would. It's just like, it's as good as done, right? So I know the power of this. But basically what you do is the very first question is, what will it cost me? So if, let's say, for example, that you want to implement something new, like exercise, right? And you hate exercise. I mean, I hated exercise. I started exercising really properly, 6 days a week, about 2 years ago. Before that, about 2.5 years ago. Before that, oh my God, seriously, there were so many other priorities, as there always are so many other priorities, instead of going and actually doing exercise. But I knew that I needed to do it for my health. And so I decided that, okay, a cost exercise is in order. And that's what I did. So what I basically did was, I sat down and I answered the first question on paper, which is this: what is it costing me in my life right now to continue to choose not to exercise? And mind you, when you're talking about cost, you're talking about cost in every way: physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, mentally, relationship-wise, like in every possible single way that you can think of. You then start to write down the costs. Right? So here's how you do it. And you want to get to like 200 answers on that piece of paper, or as many as you can possibly get. And so here's how you do that. It actually becomes very easy. So what you do is you write the first thing down. So what is it costing me not to continue to choose not to exercise? And we put in, all of those different areas just as a trigger and a reminder. And then you basically start writing down. So let's say it's costing me, me being overweight. Right? Then you start asking yourself, okay, why is that a problem? Well, if I'm overweight, I don't feel good about myself. Why is that a problem? Well, I don't feel attractive. Why is that a problem? Well, I don't want to be with my partner. Why is that a problem? Well, I don't try to conceive. Why is that a problem? I don't have a baby, right? Like, obviously, I'm kind of giving you a very general example here, but the key aspect, the key to actually getting to the bottom of and connecting to the issues that are stopping you is actually going through that process for every single thing that you write down. So let's say, and it might be that I self-loathe and then I overeat and then I get even fatter, or whatever it is, right? So you're really writing down all of those pieces and you're putting it like down on paper for real, right? You're making all those things that go through your mind actually visible to you. Nobody's going to look at this, right? You're doing this completely and utterly confidentially for you. You do not need to share it with anyone, but there are so many studies. There are hundreds of studies that prove, and in fact, I'm doing for our patients in the Natural Fertility Breakthrough Program between Christmas and New Year, we're actually doing an evidence-based program. We, from time to time, some of we run little mini programs. This one is not open to the general public. Sometimes I do open them. This one is not open. It's just for the patients in the clinic. But it's really about, utilizing the research around narrative medicine and expressive writing. There is so much amazing evidence, and the data really suggests the decrease of anxiety, depression, improvement in health outcomes, improvement in every way. And this is a little bit of an extra piece that I'm giving you here, which really focuses on, again, creating leverage on creating action, right? So by you putting down all of those things and really pouring your heart and soul into that piece of paper, you might feel like crap. I'll be honest. Every time I do this exercise, I actually have to psych myself, I'll be honest, because there is not one time that I'm not a bawling, crying mess doing it, right? There is not one time that I just like don't completely like crumble before I pick myself up again. But the results are always so magnificent, and I've seen this across the board for all of our patients in the program and in the Fertility Challenge, that it's so worth doing. So that's the first question. What is it costing me currently to continue to choose not to do this? And you write down as many things as you possibly can. The second question is, what has it cost me in the past? This is extremely important, that you don't just go and write down what you wrote for your current, that you really think and connect the dots. You know, when I have been overweight in the past, what has it cost me? And it might be that, you know, you remember events, situations where you were called fat or you were made fun of, and it cost you your dignity or how you felt about yourself, or, you know, it cost you your happiness, whatever it is, right? But you really want to write all of those things down on paper, okay? That is the key. Then the third question is, what will it cost me in the future? I remember once I did this exercise, and I actually described this procedure actually in Fertility Breakthrough. I described not only the cost exercise, but also how I did it and how I increased the leverage piece even more. It involves, you know, this kind of very disgusting thing. Anyway, you have to read the book to see what I'm talking about. But basically, what I did there, and what you want to do in terms of your future question, right, is you really want to connect. Like for me, when I did this exercise the first time, the thing that and it was about PCOS, and it was about not eating sugar, because we all know, right, eating sugar is going to dramatically exacerbate PCOS symptoms. So that was actually the very first time that I did this. And it was about eating sugar and eating chocolate. And so for me, what ended up being is that I knew that I was never going to overcome these symptoms if I didn't stop doing that. And I just could not compel myself in any way possible to do it. Right? And that's when I did this exercise. And in my future one, that's when it literally broke me, because I remember at the time, it was a very recent time after my most beloved grandmother's death. And the way that happened was that she had type 2 diabetes, and she wasn't very good at controlling her blood sugar levels. She used to eat things that she shouldn't, and you know, she wasn't a very good diabetic patient, let's put it that way. And that caught up with her one day because of her imbalanced blood sugar levels. She ended up having a stroke. Right, and the stroke left her a vegetable, right? And this woman, who I absolutely adored, and who, you know, was such a huge part of my life, was, you know, a vegetable. All of it. She was so lively, and she was so just, you know, full of energy and life and compassion and all of these things. And then she was just like a vegetable one day, paralyzed, couldn't speak. It was really sad. It was really, really sad. And I remembered that it was, you know, as a result of ultimately her own choices, which is very hard to recognize and sometimes very hard to accept. But, you know, the truth is that that's exactly what the situation was in this case. And as horrible as it was, you know, one of the things that really I remember putting down on paper, and I remember this was 1.5 decades ago, right? This is about 15 years ago. And I remember to this day what I wrote down, and it was that in the future, the cost to me would be my life, you know, and the chance and the potential that I could become a vegetable because of not balancing, not regulating what it is that I needed to regulate. But you see, getting to there by me just telling you isn't the same as you actually linking the dots in your brain. There is a saying that writing is the doing part of thinking, right? And that is really what this process enables you to create and achieve. So be really diligent in doing it, because it will transform you in the process of doing it. And this, all the research completely guarantees, right? So I know for a fact, and I personally have gone through it, so I know that that is very, very true. So writing down and getting to the bottom of what it's going to mean, and for me, it not only meant, you know, the potential that could happen, but that would have an early death, and I wouldn't be able to make the difference that I want to see being made in the world. And so that was became very compelling, became very real, became very compelling. And all of a sudden, I didn't even need anything else. I didn't touch chocolate for I said to myself actually after I did that exercise that I wasn't going to touch chocolate for a year after that. And I did not touch chocolate for 5 years after that. It was that level of compelling. Sometimes what will happen is, and I was an absolute blubbering mess at the end of that exercise, and sometimes what will happen is that you will feel worse whilst you're in the process than you will obviously after, when you start to get the benefits and the results. So just be aware of that as well, because that's just part of getting better and improving and removing that obstacle. The reason I'm spending so much time on this is because I know for a fact, having treated the number of people that I have treated over the years and seeing what it takes to get results with people, it's about actually getting that headpiece right. If you don't get that right, you can try in inverted commas your best, and it's still not going to, it's going to be hard. It's going to be just so much harder than what it actually needs to be. So putting this down on paper is exceptional. And then the fourth piece of this exercise is actually looking at what will I gain in my life as a result of doing this. So, exercise is the thing that we started with. What will I gain from implementing regular exercise and regular physical activity? That is how you complete a cost exercise. I promise you, if you do it properly, it will be a mess. It will be uncomfortable. It will be challenging, but it will be the most rewarding thing. And if ever you're starting to kind of slip in your resolution to continue to implement that exercise piece, just reread your list. So the list is something that I absolutely would recommend that you keep. Once you've done it, keep it. Keep it handy. To begin with, you might not need to look at it any more than once a week, right? And then you could spread it out to about once every 3 months. But I would highly recommend that you actually keep it very handy. And if you see yourself slipping, you go back and you revisit and you read every single thing that you wrote down on that list. That is the way that you get the headpiece right. Right? You get that right and everything else moves behind it. If you don't get that right, you will drag yourself. It's like, the whole New Year's resolutions thing. That's why the reason that that's such BS is because people don't get their head right. Right? They have this kind of pie in the sky thing of like, oh yes, I want to do whatever, right? And then 2 weeks later, they're already not doing that thing anymore. Why? Because there is no compelling reason why. And so when there is no compelling reason, we just kind of divert back to what we were doing before, which is typically not in our best interest, right? So is this making sense? Give me some love, give me some likes. This is, a really important piece that if we get this, it makes all the difference in everything else that needs to happen from here. Big idea number two. Big idea number two is that diet really does matter. Okay, so your nutrition matters more than you will ever know. And most people complicate the heck out of this, right? We do not need to complicate it to the point that it gets complicated, right? In the handout that I shared with you, so if you don't know where to find the handout, you go to thefertile.me/PCOS handout. Great, good to see that you guys are getting this. PCOS handout, okay? That's where you go and find it. And in there is a very important piece. I also mentioned this and talked about this last week. So I don't want to revisit what I've already talked about last week, but I want to talk about an extra component of diet that's going to be important. But here's the concept that I like to share. It's a concept that I've come up with now a few years ago now that really simplifies diet for people, okay? What you want to do is you want to eat as fewer steps from field to table as possible. You want to be able to recognize your food, right? So you want to be able to see it on your plate and go, oh yes, that is corn, or oh yes, that's tomato, or oh yes, that is, cabbage, whatever it is, right? And you want to base your meals on vegetables and protein, but your vegetables, you want to make sure that they're the non-starchy kind. If you have PCOS, it's extremely important to really be very careful about the amount of carbohydrates that you are consuming, okay? What I would go as far as to say, avoid every carbohydrate that's processed. Anything that comes in a packet is tossed, right? We're talking about breads and biscuits and cakes and, all of those things that, mind you, if you have PCOS, all of those foods that I just mentioned, which are not really foods, but, products, all of those things typically contain trans fats, which has been shown in a study of almost 20,000 people to increase anovulation by 73% in PCOS women. So whenever you put or attempt to put some of those things in your mouth, remember that. Remember that you are literally choosing to be infertile, because for PCOS women, what happens is that you will absolutely be impacted in terms of anovulation at a much, much greater rate than women who consume those foods who don't have PCOS or irregular cycles. And I know that it feels like a slap in the face, right? Because for women with PCOS and insulin dysregulation of any kind, that's the one thing that you want to eat the most. Right? Sugar, sweets, carbohydrates, and it's almost like you feel like you're being punished by not having this. Why do you think that not eating sugar was my first cost exercise? Because of that very reason, okay? But it is absolutely key when we talk about this conversation, this condition, and how this works. It is absolutely crucial that you understand how vital basing your meals on vegetables and protein actually is to getting the result that you're looking for. So lots of people saying hello to me right now. Hello. So is this making sense, right? Because ultimately, you can do whatever it is that you want. You can take all the drugs you want. You can take all the metformin you want. You can take all the insulin that you want. If you don't clear the obstacle, which is the injury part of having consumption of those foods all the time, you are going to be putting yourself in a precarious situation when it comes to regulating cycles and optimizing your fertility. It is not okay. It's not going to, and by the way, I'm not talking about perfection here. Like people sometimes think that because I, make recommendations, and I make recommendations about doing this most of the time, that it means that I'm asking you to be perfect, right? I'm not asking you to be perfect. I haven't actually figured that piece out myself, right? So, and I don't ask my patients to do anything that I wouldn't actually do myself. Therefore, it's not about perfection, right? It's about ensuring that you do the very best that you can. That really is what it's about. Now, in terms of eating, even when I was doing my preconception, even when I was working on optimizing and regulating my cycles, I would go and have my 10% for the soul meal. Right? 10% for the soul basically means 2 meals a week, and it's not 2 days a week, right? It's 2 meals a week where I ate whatever I wanted. The only caveat on the 10% for the soul rule is that there is no coffee, no alcohol, and definitely no fried foods, right? But for the rest, for that 1 meal or 2 meals in the week, you can go and have a pizza if you're not, sensitive to, if you're not celiac, sorry. But, as you know, in terms of fertility diet, I recommend gluten-free, dairy-free anyway, because that helps to optimize and rebalance your hormones. So that would still contain, that would still be contained within the 10% for the soul. So you can still have that. Like when I was doing my preparation, oh my God, pizza? Gnocchi, I can't live without those. And thank God I'm not celiac, because if I was, I wouldn't be having it at all. And I don't have a dairy, full blown. Every single person, mind you, has a dairy sensitivity, right? But I didn't have an allergy. And so that 1 or 2 meal a week is definitely the little kind of, caveat where you kind of just put in there a little bit of the 10% for the soul, right? And I like the 10% for the soul too, Hannah. It's definitely awesome. So, but that's something that you do need to keep to the 10%, right? 10% doesn't mean 20%. It doesn't mean 30%. It doesn't mean 50%. It means 10%. Okay. And that's also part of what you can work on with your cost exercise. Because again, if you don't get this piece right, the body doesn't achieve homeostasis. The irregularity, the cycle dysregulation continues. The symptoms continue. The pimples continue. The everything continues, and you don't get the result that you want, which ultimately is the healthy baby of your dreams, right? By you not doing these things and doing them consistently in the best possible way that you can, it's like you are choosing to continue to have irregular cycles, right? And if you are choosing that, then what else are you choosing as a result of this? You know what I'm getting at, right? We've talked about why this is the case. We've talked about the importance of getting the headpiece right. But, sometimes you just got to face it, right? You've got to face the fact that if you're not doing the best that you can and as much as you can, you're actually contributing to your problem. You're contributing to what's not working and what's not helping you take home the healthy baby of your dreams, right? And me saying this in this context, often people take that out of context, and I get so much hate for saying this on social media, right? But I don't care, because at the end of the day, I'm not doing you a service by letting you think that you can do whatever it is that you want to do and then not get a result. I say this all the time. I am so biased towards results, and I prefer results than being liked. Of course, I prefer being liked, but I like results even more, right? So I will say what it is that I need to say to get you to move, to get you to do what it is that you need to do. And so, and that's me having a best. I might never ever meet you, right? I might never talk to you ever, but know that I have your best interest in mind and in my heart when I actually make these recommendations for you. Right? I want to make sure that you get results. And the only way that you're going to is if you face the fact that if you're not doing what it is that you need to be doing, you are actually, it's almost like you're scoring goals for the opposite team, right? Not a good strategy. Not a good strategy. That will never win you the World Cup. And I'm Brazilian, so I know, right? At least I was born there. But yeah, so, this is the thing. And look at this. Look at this. Oh my God. Okay. So, it always happens that, there has to be somebody who basically thinks that whatever it is that their opinion is of one person is going to actually be what's going to help people get their results. And what we do is we actually get those people out of our community. So, but ultimately, just keep in mind what I just said, because that's important, okay? So let's go through and let's say, so diet-wise, that's going to be absolutely key. And, excuse me, that's what you want to focus on, okay? Making sure that you base your meals on your vegetables and your protein. If you want to be vegetarian, there is a very, very large conversation about vegetarianism, and to the point that I might even actually do a full Ask Gabriela Rosa on that topic. My recommendation is not to be vegetarian, but I also don't say to people that they have to eat meat if they don't want to. In our clinic, whenever we take on vegetarians, though, we make sure that we test for every amino acid and their levels so that we can ensure that we are supplementing accordingly to what it is that person needs, okay? So that's very, very important. And that's also why when I talk about eating, basing your meals on vegetables and protein, I say it that way, because you then get all of your amino acids if you're having your organic meats. Ideally, you want to have organic meats, chicken, fish. Fish is so problematic these days because of the amount of toxicity. But, from time to time, small fish, deep sea, kind of ocean fish are the best, okay? And of course, doing the best that you can with having as fresh foods, that you can possibly have as part of your meals. That's what's going to really help to regulate and balance your cycles, okay? So that's going to be key. Now, in terms of, and diet, I'm going to leave it there, because in the handout, you get lots of information, lots of advice, and lots of guidance in terms of what else to do there. We also have, on our website, if you ever needed it, you don't need it, honestly, basing meals on vegetables and protein. If you want recipes, there's heaps of recipes online. But we do have a service where we actually have meal plans, fertility diet meal plans for people who want it. So if you go onto the website, naturalfertilitybreakthrough.com/shop, you will find it there. And it comes every week, and it has different recipes, and they're all approved by me, different recipes with ingredients and shopping lists and everything else. It just makes it super easy. Also, my book, Eat Your Way to Parenthood, is all you need. You know, like you get those recipes, you create a meal plan of your own. We actually go through, you can do this completely for free by going through the Fertility Challenge. So go ahead and just do the Fertility Challenge. You get all of those pieces, you know, delivered, basically given to you for free. If you do want to, you know, enhance that and get the meal plan or get the book, then by all means, that's going to be something that will be very, very easy to do. Excellent. So what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the next big idea. And the next big idea, now, hang on a second, there's a question here about, yeah, so I think I've answered. So if you let me know, I'm pretty much sure that I've answered the kind of the vegetarian question. We do have a specific protocol for vegetarians in our program, but we actually don't have that for people outside of our program at this point. But you definitely want to be making sure that there's not a lot of soy, that you want to be, you know, having your nuts and seeds and legumes if that's what you're going to, do, i.e. be vegetarian. And we've got Instagram finished up. So this is essentially where we just continue on from Facebook. All right, so yeah, let me know, Sophie, if that has answered your question. If it hasn't, then I'm happy to, yeah, and you know, there are many people who come to us who typically, they end up choosing that option of going back to eating some animal protein, and you don't have to eat it. You know, like, I mean, we're not talking about that, you know, you eating that more than anything else. And, you know, instead of eating your vegetables, then by all means, like, you want to be having that maybe once a day. That would be at the minimum, right? Or that would be kind of almost ideal in terms of for getting all of your amino acids. That's really, really key. So the handout can be found at thefertile.me/PCOS handout. thefertile.me/PCOS handout. Excellent. So we've talked about diet. Now, this is my biggest secret weapon. Idea number 3, and I'm going to be really quick because I'm running out of time. So this is something that I have been playing around with for the last 2.5 years that has transformed. It has been a complete and utter game changer for me. And then I actually went to the research because I was seeing so many positive and beneficial results of weightlifting, right? And this is bodybuilding weightlifting training, and how I was feeling, that I'm like, there's something to this. And I actually then ended up going to PubMed and having a look at the scientific literature and finding out actually that there is a lot of benefit. In fact, I think that in the handout, let me just check, but I think in the handout, I've added some of those references for you. Let's see, about exercise. And if I haven't, I will make sure that that gets done by the end of today, because there are some references there in terms of what it is that exercise will do. And this is not any just exercise, right? You want to be doing something on a daily basis, okay? For me, I train 45 minutes every single day, heavy weights training. So what does that mean? Well, basically it's 70% capacity, 70 to 80% capacity, and the weights are heavy enough that it's kind of, you know, it's challenging to get to 10, right? To 10 repetitions. And 3 sets generally is what I do, and, you know, kind of combine 2 exercises and then do that, have a rest, combine another 2, have a rest, combine another 2, have a rest. That's kind of how, you know, I train. And I have seen, because of it's the resistance component here that makes a difference. How you integrate that resistance component is going to be completely up to you. But the resistance aspect and doing it to, like I said, to failure or to getting to a minimum or to a maximum of 10 repetitions, like you pick whatever weight you can do, that you can go to a maximum between 6, 8 to 10, right, repetitions of that particular exercise. And that's what you do. You do that for 45 minutes. Typically in 45 minutes, I get through, I train 1 body part per week, per day, sorry. So, you know, one day's legs, the other day's shoulders, the other day's back, the other day I do legs twice a week, which is horrendous, but great at the same time. And then one day is just kind of like chest and extra shoulders and arms. So basically, what I have seen is that by doing that, like in one session for 45 minutes, I actually get through between, depending on how, motivated I am that day, and I'm not the same level of motivation every day, I'll be honest, I'll get through 6 to 8 exercises, right? And that typically is enough for you to get the effect that I'm talking about here. It really, the research actually shows that heavy weights training will decrease anxiety and depression scores, and this is for participants in clinical trials, improves insulin resistance and improves insulin sensitivity, and I've noticed this greatly. Also, in terms of PCOS specifically, I know for a fact it's one of the reasons as to why cycles become so regular, like for me, right? It's the one thing that I have changed. What's really fascinating in the research that I found, and we're doing a sexual satisfaction clinical trial next year. So I've started to look at what the intervention needs to look like. And, improving sexual desire has definitely, so in this particular study, it looked at, the fact that heavy weights training for women with PCOS improves sexual desire, excitement, lubrication, and ease of orgasm. So what can I say? It's definitely the prescription for you, right? It definitely helps so many different aspects of your well-being that I cannot recommend it highly enough. But it's not just, like a brisk walk or cardio is not going to have the same effect, even though those are great ways, and it's a great exercise as well. But, going in and doing heavy weights training is going to absolutely change so much in terms of your physiology that it's the exercise that I recommend for fertility. Honestly. So, and again, you're going to 70 to 80% of your capacity, right? So you're not actually killing yourself. You're increasing and improving as you go again. Okay. And somebody asked here, would it be the same if I go to an exercise class? Not really, because typically in those exercises, if you do those exercise classes, typically it's lighter weights, more repetition. What you want here is heavier weights, less repetition. I also find that it's an incredibly efficient way of training, right? Because it's so quick. Like by the end of my leg day, I am so exhausted. I often say, and I train with a personal trainer, but before I did, I had a training buddy, and it was great because we both had the same kind of objective, same goal. We both used to meet at the gym 6 a.m. and we would go and do the thing. This was before I had kids. Now I can't get out of the house that early because my husband goes to work earlier than me. So I have to stay here until my nanny arrives. But, before when I could go anytime that I wanted, that was the thing. It was just and by the way, when you do this, make sure that it's something that just happens, that you do not think about, right? Like with my gym buddy, it was 6 a.m. I used to roll out of bed into my gym clothes. I didn't even know my name and walk to the gym, right? That's what you need to do. Now, similar thing, but it's at a different time for me. But, I know I have an appointment. I have to get there. 7:30 is the time that I train. So I get up 4:30 in the morning. I do my work until 7. I leave, go to the gym, come back to work, right? So you've got to do what you've got to do. So I have so many reasons as to why that shouldn't happen for me. So many excuses in my own mind about how busy and how many things I have to get done and whatever. That's why it's just an appointment. It just happens. I just know, and it just gets done, right? So, but it is the number, this is my secret weapon when it comes to PCOS. I honestly can tell you that I am not perfect with my diet, and this is the one thing I'm religious about, and it has made all of the difference. And, when I actually then went to look at the research, I've found out that it's not just my observation. There's been quite a few clinical trials run on this specific way of training. So, definitely highly recommend it. In terms of bonus idea number 4, and I don't have much time, so I'll cover this very quickly, but this is a key component, which is to chart your cycle. When I was in my trying to conceive years, I've overcome infertility naturally with PCOS, had 2 baby boys who are now 7 and 4. But basically, when I was trying to conceive, for the years that I was doing my preparation, I actually charted my temperatures and put in, it was paper, at that point it was paper. I used Fertility Friend for a long time, and still one of the apps that I prefer, actually, because it's just really easy to see everything. in Fertility Friend. Personally now, because I don't have to, when you chart your temperatures, that's the case. I mean, now there are so many different ones. There are ones that come with the thermometer, and it automatically registers onto your app, you know, so that's linked and everything. Perfect, fabulous. That's what you want. You want something that it's kind of set and forget. You don't have to really, you know, think about it too much. But whatever methodology, way that you do your charting, do it. Because here's the thing, when I actually was trying to conceive, what I figured out about my body, and you will figure this out about your own body, is that they talk about PCOS and you have irregular cycles, but it's actually not truly always what the body does, the irregular piece. What the body does is it has a pattern and it has a regularity. It's just that it's lengthened. And so people lose track. So for me, what used to happen is that, and I figured this out only because I was charting, otherwise I would still probably be in the dark about this now, and I probably would still be infertile now, is that I figured out that my ovulation was by charting, right? And obviously knowing what I was looking for, I figured out that my ovulation was actually happening on day 30 of my cycle, not on day 14, as it should in a textbook, you know, kind of cycle happen. So what ended up happening as a result of that is that when I, you know, if I was to try to conceive without knowing that information, I'd be missing it every single cycle, every single month. Right? So lengthen cycles, and lengthen cycles for any reason, right? Whether it's premature ovarian failure, whether it's, and mind you, with premature ovarian failure, you have less regularity, but it's still possible to conceive with a lengthened cycle despite, you know, that diagnosis. So really what needs to happen is that you need to be able to look at what is your body doing and try and start to correlate a pattern with how your body's operating. And the only way that you're going to do that is by taking your daily temperatures. It's one of the easiest ways. Ovulation kits do not work for women with PCOS. Those little microscope things, saliva microscope things, do not work for women with PCOS. The only thing that works for timing for women with PCOS is temperature charting and correlating your symptoms and seeing, you know, because you'll start to see, your body will start to tell you when you're about to ovulate, your mucus peaks as well. And you can then start to, when you actually put it down on paper or in an app or in a chart, you then start to be able to see what are your fertile signs, and you can start to correlate when those fertile signs happen retrospectively when you ovulated based on your temperatures, and you can then start timing effectively. So it took me quite a long time. It took me about 12 months to have enough data about my cycle to be able to actually make that correlation. But you know what? The time will pass anyway. If you're doing all of these things, you will dramatically improve the regularity of your cycle, and you'll be able to see a pattern much faster, right? I didn't know this. Like up until 2.5 years ago, in fact, now we're looking retrospectively, right? I did not know that my cycles were going to be so regular as a result of these things that I've implemented. If I had known this, it would have been much faster for me, and it can be much faster for you. Now that you know it, you just need to implement it, right? So those are the key things that you need to recognize and that you need to understand. Is this making sense? Give me some love, give me some likes. I just want to make sure that you're really clear about all of that. So, excellent. So let's have a look. Okay, so then what we are doing is, basically, I think that covers. I just realized that we've just covered all of the things that I wanted to cover for today. So I absolutely appreciate you being here. Thank you for, your attention, for your time. I know that I've ran over time. I apologize. I hope that you've got some amazing things out of this. I know for a fact that, 2020 can be your baby year. If you need extra help, if you need extra support, have a chat to me or my team, and we'll be happy to, see if we can assess your situation and see if we can be of assistance. And if we can, fantastic. And if we can't, you will have some extra pieces that are going to guide you on your journey. If you want to chat to my team, I think the best way to do it is going to be to thefertile.me/chat, and you'll be able to organize a time, and they will give you a call, and we can assess your situation if that is the appropriate thing to do. So thefertile.me/chat. And that's pretty much it for me. Remember, you have so much more power than you realize. implement this, everything that I've shared here today and that I've shared in the recommendations and the resources that I've made available as part of this video for you. If you implement those things, those are the correct strategies. And then what you need to do is you need to be consistent with it. And being consistent with it creates amazing transformation and change. So go ahead and be your own transformation. Until next time, bye for now.